Welcome to the channel, everybody. Today we have a special guest, the author of The Truth About Demons, Cam Gilchrist. Quick, we're going to bring him on in a minute here, and I'm going to show you the title of the book. You can get his book in pre-order. It goes fully on sale soon, and there's a special offer where you get the Blu-ray for Witness Underground for free if you buy the book during the pre-order sale. We're going to bring on the author in a minute, but the book dives into lots of topics, and we're going to try to go through all of them to some degree with Cam's actual stories. It's a memoir, not a novel. So it's true stories about abuse, neurodivergence, learning impediments, homelessness, poverty, deep loss, drugs, alcohol, and the criminal underworld. But there's always light at the end of the dark tunnel. And we'll get in at the end, kind of how he got into recovery, his methods that helped him with money or all of those things. And also the thing that ties our two projects together is the path from being highly religious to humanism and what that looks like. And if you watched Witness Underground already, then you know that that's one of the themes of the story of all the characters in the film. So let's bring on Cam. How you doing today, Cam?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Let's get right into this. Well, actually, can you tell people where they can buy the book? I brought up the website there, but can you discuss how does it work?
Yeah, I sure will. So the book is currently available in hardcover on Amazon, under The Truth About Demons and Memoir by C.A. Gilchrist. For those of you who don't want a hardcover, certainly understand we've got the pre-order set for both the Kindle version and for the paperback version. It's also available for pre-order in all formats on Barnes & Noble and Nook, also for Apple Books, Gobo, just about every place where you can get a book. Whatever your type of reader you're into and you're using, you'll be able to find a copy of it.
Great.
And by the way, the drop date is January 15th for all those other versions.
Awesome. And so I've been reading it on the Book Funnel app. Is that going to be one of the options for the buyers?
I don't think so. I think the Book Funnel is just the way that I used to get that out to all my beta readers, my initial readers.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're going to get it on Amazon. And what were the other options one more time?
Sure. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Google Books, and there's a host of others. I think that it's about 85% of the reading public with those apps, though.
Okay, great. Yeah, I've been really enjoying it, and we're going to talk kind of more in depth about themes. And if anybody wants to get a copy of the book, if they buy it during the pre-order, if you go to witnessunderground.com and subscribe on there, you can put your email address, and then write me. Let me know that you want the free promo code for buying the Blu-ray for free, and you still have to pay shipping. So just be really clear what we're doing here. We're trying to get this book out into the world. Put Cam's, is this your first book?
This is, yes.
Okay. Get Cam's first book out in the world. It's excellent. It reads like a novel. It really felt, I was like sucked in. I'm there. I'm riding the bike when he's a kid. I'm, fighting the bully. I really enjoyed so far kind of what a world you've built in this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this. And let's get into some of the topics here. I don't know where you want to start. It's quite a list of heavy topics that you went through.
Sure. Start wherever you like. I'm ready to dive in. Let's get out the steely knives and slay the beast.
Great. Let's see. How do we want to make this look? Let's do this one. Okay. Well, I feel like this book starts pretty strong with a bully, and I don't know, I guess that falls into the abuse world. Maybe every kid at some point dealt with some unsavory character in school. But how did that all pan out for you, or what was the takeaways for you?
Sure, good question. So when I first started writing my memoir, I thought, let me just cut stories from my life and line all those stories out and see which ones tell a narrative about my journey of escape. And some of the earliest stories were about an encounter with shall we say, a childhood serial killer in training. And for some reason, he hated me. There was no logical, rational reason for it, but he just hated me, and he was going to do his best to hurt me in some way. And without giving away too much of the book, it turns out that it was more than just a childhood bully violence. When he was, shall we say, forced to move or coerced to move from the neighborhood, when they dug up his backyard, they found dozens and dozens of neighborhood pets' bodies that had been murdered and buried under the dirt. So sorry if that ruined that chapter for you, Scott.
No, I read that one, actually. That's kind of where I got
So
to in the book so far.
yeah, it is my feeling, and folks that I've spoken to who are professionals, I guess, in the realm of psychology, that he was experimenting with his attempts to deliver pain, and I maybe was his ultimate experiment, but he didn't get me. So
Yeah. I actually really like the scene. It read straight out of like a zombie movie or yeah, some like where you're in the mansion on the hill
yeah,
in the darkness, having like the ultimate battle with the boss, if you will, like from to
yeah,
bring video game
boss, right?
ideas.
I worked my way through
Yeah,
the menus to the game boss. Yeah, it's not
yeah,
far from how it felt as a child, too. Quite honestly, it was
yeah,
an amazing experience because I was very young. I think I was 8 or 9 at the time, and I didn't know bravery. I hadn't found my bravery legs yet. I was letting the world do things to me, so to speak.
yeah,
And that final encounter with the neighborhood bully, we'll give him that term for now, showed me that I could affect the world. I could stand up for myself. So that was the first time that I took a stance. And I thought it was important to put in the book. And I thank you for saying kindly how it's written, not your typical memoir. And it's not. I wanted to approach this from first, let's engage the reader. Let's let them read an exciting, interesting, fascinating, progressive journey. And I didn't want it to be a journey of pain, and woe is me. I wanted it to be an engaging journey with joys and pains. So that's one of the earliest pains that led to a realization, to one of my true fundamental personality building blocks is that you can stand up for yourself in this world.
yeah. So one thing that brought up for me was bicycling around the neighborhood in the 80s. I mean, straight. What's the new series that did so well with the underworld and
Stranger
D&D?
Things.
Stranger Things. It just has this like all the nostalgia that Stranger Things brings up of all the kids hanging out together. I had such similar experiences growing up in the 80s, and we had like quiet neighborhoods, but like me and my cousins and our neighborhood friends just cycling around and getting into mischief and create. It just took me back to all these like personal moments
Okay.
in a way that was like, oh man, this is a journey personally for me. It's not just
Okay.
me learning about Cam or someone else, or it was good. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I mean, and that's one of my fondest memories, of course, growing up. A child on their bike for our generation, and I know later generations maybe not so much, but for our generation, the freedom of a bike was everything in the neighborhood. It
Yeah.
was the way you engaged with your universe and with your world and with your friends. It was all. It
Yeah.
was everything.
Yeah.
So the bike actually plays a pretty big role in my book. Quite honestly, it could have its own spin-off series. We'll see.
The bike itself.
The bike. Yeah.
So you get into speech impediments in the book. Can you talk about how that
Yeah.
changed? Or was it speech? Sorry,
Well,
learning
no,
impediments.
it was actually a trauma-induced dyslexia,
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right.
and there was some
You had
other.
that. You had a teacher that kind of helped you out.
You did. I had an angel teacher, which, in my opinion, all teachers are angels. Teachers and librarians are the angels incarnate in the planet, in my opinion. But yeah, I was, and again, I don't want to ruin a lot of the chapters here, but I was involved in an accident. I'll leave it at that, but a pretty interesting accident. And as a result of the head trauma, I woke up one day basically dyslexic and didn't have the ability to read correctly, and indeed transition the written word into verbalization. And as you can imagine, talk about bullying, anybody different in school would be the subject of abuse. So not being able to say words with B's and D's back to back, or putting M's and N's together, or, I would say lawn blower instead of lawnmower, these very simple transitions, which happen still occasionally to this day. It gave me a big cognitive challenge to function. And I was fortunate enough to meet a teacher who, and at the time, dyslexia was not a known issue. There were some folks in Europe and in England who had written a few books, but it wasn't known as it is today. But she had read the books, and she identified into me immediately because she had me the year prior, then she had me in the new school year, immediately identified the issue. So she spent every one of her lunches with me, teaching me how to use my new brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then by the end of that, it seemed like there was progress being made. Like they identified the issue and how it worked with
Yeah.
your brain, and then she created a methodology to practice.
Yes,
Right?
she did. She did.
Can,
And
can you
I
describe
wrote,
that method?
I'd
Do
love
you
to.
still
Yeah.
use it?
Not so much. I've always been a prolific reader, even pre the accident, and I would just gobble books up. And I read it, we'll say, a slightly better than average rate in comprehension. Post accident, I couldn't read anymore. It just was so frustrating to me to be able to, watch a word jumble basically in a book. But her methodology was to go through every single word that she could identify which was problematic, and then put those words on cards and have me write those cards and read those cards 10 and 20 times and rewrite the word to retrain my brain to be able to see and speak the word the way we all communicate it concurrently. But an interesting thing happened. You know the old stories about a pitcher who throws a 50-mile-per-hour fastball and he breaks his arm after it's reset. Now he throws a 90-mile-per-hour fastball. Kind of what happened with relearning. I suddenly had an ridiculous reading speed and comprehension, far in exceedance of anything that they had tested at the time. So something that's not in the book is that post that retraining in that next summer, where I read close to 100 books in the 2-month break, they were shocked by how fast I could read.
In that case, they threw 100 broken arm and threw a slower ball after. Is that what you meant?
No, actually, there's an old adage, an old story about a pitcher who throws a good fastball, he breaks his arm, but something about the broken arm, the way they repaired it, gave him a snap in his tendon, and he was able to throw a faster.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah,
I misheard that. Yeah, interesting.
Maybe I misheard it too. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. One thing that made me relate to lawnmower instead of lawnmower, that moment in the book where like the entire class laughs, and makes fun of you, the character, reminded me of learning language and trying to use that language in another country. So I lived in Vietnam for a long time and Latin America for quite a long time. And the challenge of trying to speak another language feels like that moment in the classroom where your audience is like, what did you just say? Try it again. And then they're like, in Vietnam it was worse because they're like, that was, oh my God. And they're like, hold on a second. And they go get their friend or their family member. And they're like, okay, do it again. Do it again. And then you say it, they both laugh. And then in one case just walked off. I'm like, no, like this feels so awful because I also didn't learn what the problem was.
Right.
Whereas in like Spanish or Latin America, I would get laughed at. And then they're like, okay, honey, let me just teach you the right way to say that. And then like, let's practice it together. And like, it was so kind in Latin America, and Vietnam is brutal. Just like either way, it's comedy though, and I'm like, I have to suffer, and that's part of the learning process.
These are my dues.
Yeah,
yeah, and that you're not wrong. I mean, I've tried to learn a few languages, and again, it's very challenging for me too. But I managed to put a smattering of French together and a smattering of Spanish together through the years, and yeah, it is very much like that. Relearning how to communicate English when you've lost it is really no different from learning a foreign language. So yeah, dead on.
Yeah. One thing I thought maybe we should just derail for a second. Your reason that you reached out to me and your relationship to the Witness Underground film and the project I'm working on. Can you discuss a little bit about like what's the connection for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am also an ex-Jehovah's Witness, as you are. My mother found the truth. Huge air quotes, during my very troubled years, which caused some additional troubles, as we can all imagine. And in my, I guess, finding myself through the years, you always look to other folks who have lived a similar experience. And came across your movie, just basically doing a Amazon search. And I connected instantly. And what I connected with your story was obviously the things we've both gone through with the high control group, and shall we say a cultish religion, but also the way that you kept yourself intact. And you kept yourself intact through music, which I kept myself intact through the arts as well. Initially not music, initially it was through literature and writing. But then when I escaped, the ultimate redeeming thing that gave me a survival element in life was music. And it was by DJing in nightclubs and touring around and playing music in clubs. So music also for me was one of the ways where I kept my centered soul free from the dents, from the arrows that were shot at it, from all the different sources trying to change me into a version they wanted to see. So I really related to that, resonated with your story. I felt some of your pains, I felt some of your joys, I felt some of the camaraderie that you experienced, in when you were within the Jehovah's Witnesses, because there is that too, right? There's that comfortable in bubble feeling that is part of it. And so, yeah, I really related to that. I said, I got to talk to this guy. So at that time, I didn't even know that you had a podcast or, a show. I just wanted to talk and hang out. I'm sure if I had been in your congregation, I probably would asked to play the tambourine or something for sure. Although hard to play tambourine with your style of music, but I would have found a way, or cowbell perhaps.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like I'm not in the movie, but that was a whole scene. So the movie kind of depicts, a lot of people see the movie and they're like, oh, there's a band and we're following a band through their journey. But it's actually an entire music scene with like 40 bands probably over time. And I was from the fringes of that, like 4 hours away, where I was like, oh, I heard about this whole thing in the big city. But I had my own band in that, like trying to dabble in the religion with music.
Sure.
And it wasn't just my band like that. Like there's a whole scene in Chicago like that. And there's a few smatterings of Jehovah's Witness bands across Wisconsin where I grew up.
I was using the royal U in that case, right? For sure.
Yeah. No, I understand. But just for the audience,
Yes.
it's like a huge scene, and it was a movement in a sense, like that. The '90s somehow, for some reason, I think it was like all the elders grew up with hair metal, and they're like, oh, people are like in their like silly little garage bands. That's nothing compared to like Kiss or Van Halen. Which even then, like the elders in our next congregation over were like, they would after the meeting they would like go home and like play Van Halen and covers, and like they were like badass 80s hair metal rocker elders.
Right.
So like they were like, oh, you guys can have your band, it's fine, we do that too. But yeah, cool. I appreciate the connection that you felt to the arts.
For sure. And quite honestly, at the time I saw your name on there and I didn't know you weren't one of the people in the film. I didn't go that much deeper. But that was, I reached out to you for that reason, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the pitch you sent, the email that you and your person helping you out, Amy Zimmerman.
Amy, my
publicist, I was like, I can't say no to Cam. It's the best pitch ever. Like no one's reached out to me and been like, this is why my author should be on your show. It's like, you're absolutely right. Your author needs to be on this show. So thank you.
And I have to point out, because she's going to listen to this, she's not just my publicist. She's also my girlfriend and my partner. So I have to say that. I have to say I should have led with that. That's my girlfriend, but hey, she's awesome. But yeah, she did an amazing job of expressing the reason I wanted to join you and have this conversation with you. So I think it's great.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I hope everybody buys the book. Go out there and check it out. But let's get deeper in. We were talking about speech and learning impediments. Homelessness. Can you get into your experience with homelessness? There's actually quite a few of former Jehovah's Witnesses who end up on the street, and I'm sure other cults also, former cult members also end up on the streets. I'm curious about like what the connection is there, or was it related to something else?
Yeah. So my book does take me from about 8 years or so till the time I'm 25. That's the stretch. I like to cut into 3 parts. It's kind of the easiest, and of course I took some biblical language to describe the section: Genesis, Exodus, Job, and then Revelation. So 4 parts in the book, but basically 3 parts in life. And the 4 parts are: first, when I was Genesis, just a child, the positive formation of me as a child, the things I wanted to do, the dreams I wanted to have. Then Exodus is when things started to be taken away from me. And one of those was my father at a young age. Another was, unfortunately, my mother's cognitive capability. She had some issues where she was taken away for a while. And then, of course, it was my freedoms from the Jehovah's Witnesses and the stifling that occurred there. And then ultimately it led with homelessness. I was thrown out of the house at about 18 and in a few days because I refused to adhere or even subscribe to the beliefs of the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was more of a refutation of some of the behaviors I had seen that were excused by the elders in the congregation. I had firsthand witnessed abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, and knew of some sexual abuse that had occurred to some of the sisters. And I couldn't find a way to reconcile a God choosing these people to lead anyone. And that sent me into kind of a deep philosophical research point in my life. Because
What age were you at that point? for ages? I'm sure it
When I
wasn't just one day.
started, yeah, sure thing. When I started really doubting things seriously was probably 14.
Okay.
Um, I was never fully in. There's always one foot out because at heart, I think somehow I was genetically born a skeptic.
Mm,
I'm from the prove me state, and I want to see evidence for things, both
mhm,
positive and negative. If you're going to tell me you're righteous, I need to see evidence of righteousness. If you're going to tell me that I'm wrong, you need to bring some proof, not just a book
mm,
or an opinion or an allegory. I need evidence, and I think that's a reasonable way to live your life. So the evidence that I saw didn't agree with the words I was being told. So I went searching, both historically and within my own heart. I did quite a bit of reading of major philosophers through the years, which kind of cracked my brain open to see things from a different side. And I started the journey of freedom, mental freedom. Um, so while my brain finally got free, so did my living arrangements. My mother threw me out and said that uh, the elders said the best thing I could do is to throw you out of the house with no job, no money, no transportation. Well, that's not entirely true. I had a broken down motorcycle, no place to
and,
stay. So
and how old were you for it getting kicked out?
18,
Threatening with
18.
18. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And as you know, growing up in any high control group, not just the Jehovah's Witnesses, you're told to focus on the future under God's rule. So not to prepare for a successful career or life or even finish high school in effect, but you should think about that long-term payoff of eternal life after Armageddon. So as a result, I had no schooling, I had no skills, at least that I was aware of, or any formal skills. So I couldn't really get a job. Um, so yeah, so that's how I ended up in homelessness. That's how I ended up
Mm,
on, without a home. Not initially on the street, but initially
mhm.
without a home.
It's a strange way to start life. Um,
Yeah,
as a single adult, young adult.
yeah.
Um, did How long did you interact with in that phase of your life? How long were you on the or out of a house or
Sure.
non-housed human?
Sure. I'm not sure what the appropriate term is. I think I'm
Okay.
allowed to say homeless because I was, right? But so underhoused and unhoused are two different things, right?
Mm,
Uh, Underhoused means you have a place where you can put your head that's indoors and covered, but it's not yours and it's not regular and it's not guaranteed. Unhouses, completely unhouses when you're basically in your car, you're on the street, or on a bench somewhere.
mm,
So it was probably a solid period of perhaps 4 years. Various times it was underhoused, and other times it was truly homeless. The underhoused and the homelessness kind of mixed because I'd find a place for 2 to 3 months until something else would fall down around me and I was back on the street. And it reached its culmination where I was living in a car that I managed to purchase. And then that car was basically stolen from me. And then I had a very hard period where I was physically on the street, which probably lasted around 8 to 9 months, where it was your more traditional understanding of the word homeless. And by the way, that's the piece cardboard um, that is
oh
a
yeah.
chapter in the book and was also recently performed on a stage here in San Diego. That is kind of gives you a feeling of a realization that I had to make. Because through that entire time period, I never thought of myself with the H word. I refused the word homeless. I refused the word, street liver, whatever words you want to use for it.
Yeah.
Um, and there was a period when I had to acknowledge that I was, and I had to accept the name and accept the concept and take it to heart that indeed I was homeless and come to grips with it. Now, obviously, I'm not homeless
Yeah.
anymore, and I did find a way up and out. But yeah, I'd say about 4 years or so of intermittent homelessness, shall we say?
Yeah. Can you describe what this is that I put up on screen?
Yeah,
The cardboard performance
yeah,
by John Carroll.
for sure. So every year there's a competition in San Diego, and it's for writers to submit writing from their memoir. I submitted this year the chapter cardboard. And the chapter cardboard occurs late into my homelessness when everything that could possibly go wrong had gone wrong. And for the first time, I ended up on the street begging for money to buy a battery or get a charge for my car, which was my home. And through the help of someone I met in the stream named Boo Boo, who was an amazing man, we managed to get enough money to get a battery. So the San Diego Memoir Society picked my chapter as a winner, and it was performed last week on stage by an amazing actor. His name is John Carroll. Doesn't look like me, doesn't sound like me, portrayed things a little differently than maybe I was at the time, but he captured he distilled the feelings that I felt at the time about making that admission to myself. And that homelessness is not the same story for everyone. We're underhoused. We traditionally judge homelessness by the worst we see. So we see somebody that's been thrown out of a mental home on the street, basically, almost violent or forlorn and sleeping in filth. And that's the brush we use to judge the concept of homelessness. So cardboard was an effort to show that, hey man, this can happen to anyone in any place at any time if you don't have a support system underneath you. So be careful what brush you use to paint. People who attended the show, who I've known for quite a long time, had no idea that I lived on the street for a period of time.
Yeah.
And who would
Actually
think
has me thinking about the whole concept of van life. Like I'm a old millennial, so I'm born in 81. So the earliest year you could say that from the transition of Gen X to millennial.
Mhm.
And van life is interesting because it's like millennials can't afford houses, or they're just starting to be able to in their 40s, late 30s.
Yeah.
Partially because of the inflation and like the cost of housing and like the housing supply, whatever. There's a lot of factors to it, of course. But a lot of millennials have vans and like go camping or like live out of vans or like live on the street, urban camping. But it was this sort of phenomenon, right? Where like 10 years ago it started ish, where it was like sexy and cool to like be doing that. And I got wrapped into that. I kind of always wanted a Volkswagen camper. And then as a teenager, and then when I was like, I could actually afford a van. So I bought a van, but I'm a mechanic because I was trained, in Wisconsin to like build and fix all your own stuff. So I was like, I want to repair this thing from scratch. I did all the work myself and I'm really proud of it. And I still own it. But the way I really initially used it was actually like, I felt like it was my own choices, but ultimately economically, it was probably my only option. So this concept of like underhousing, like I made a deal with like a commune where I could like park the van outside, but I also had a job, so I kind of needed to be in the urban area. It just feels like actually, without even really giving it too much thought, besides like trying to frame it as this like sexy thing that my generation was doing at the time, I was actually like toying with on the edge of like homelessness, underhoused world.
Yeah.
And it economically was kind of necessary for me at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I relate to that. And it's interesting, even having lived in my car for so long and trying to find safe places where the police wouldn't beat me, or people wouldn't try to steal my car or everything that I owned, or freezing to death because it was 20 degrees and I didn't have enough gas to keep the heater going.
Yeah.
There's still a part of me that longs for exactly that life you're talking about. It's interesting. You transition to the other side of that, and I'm housing secure, of course, but the freedom that you have is a real thing. And I think that was the appeal of the van life. It was the freedom. It was not being tied down. And yes, there was economical necessity for quite a few people who adopted the lifestyle, but also to be able to go and do whatever you wanted is got a great magnetic pull. So I sometimes think, man, wouldn't it be great just to sell everything and get a camper and just go? So it is different though, in that I think it's different when it's a choice. And I think it's different when you're prepared to live a life that is like a little rougher than you might imagine.
Yeah.
If that had happened to me later on in life, I probably would have bounced a lot quicker than the time it took me to bounce.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing about that.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Actually, just a strange side note, my Volkswagen camper, when it was finished, like perfected, repainted. Oh no, it wasn't quite repainted. That was the last thing I needed. New engine, new transmission, like interior. It got stolen while I was out of town. I lost my job. I had surgery, and I came home from this trip, and it was under a 24-hour surveillance with like walking guards outside. It was stolen there, and it was stolen by a former Jehovah's Witness on the street. And I was like, and I found that out like a month later because she like found out where I lived and like tried to get some stuff from me, like that where she'd left in the stolen vehicle.
Oh, wow.
And it was this whole mess. And like her kid was in jail, and basically she just wanted her phone back. And she's like, "This is my only way for my kid to contact me." And she's like, and at the end, she's like, "All right, I'll leave and I won't come back, but just take my sister's number because she's a Jehovah's Witness." And I was like, "Yo, like this culture is so broken."
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
I think that means that this woman also doing drugs, doing meth out of my vehicle, is probably also tied up in that world somehow with no support system, and like ended up on the street, like sadly, where this is her situation. And it's like not just her, it's like her kid is wrapped up in the crime and like the,
Generational. It's
yeah,
generational. I mean, and again, I know our intent here isn't to demean the Jehovah's Witness organization. That's not our sole intent. We're here to tell our story and our experience in life. That
yeah,
includes some of that, right? But
yeah,
the reality of it is that if you take a generation of people and you tell them to not live for today, but live for tomorrow, they're going to be ill prepared to live today. And then if you take those children of that mind control, and in order to change their behaviors or win their hearts and mind, you separate them from the few things they love and know in the bubble, and you throw them into a world that they're woefully prepared for. The desperation is going to lead them down the same trail almost every time. And I have talked to dozens of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that ended up on the street just like me. I've also talked to dozens of folks from the Mormon organization that were thrown out, young males, because of the imbalance of young males to women within the bubble. Also, folks who are, LGBTQ organization just in San Diego. There's a special outreach community and a temporary living shelter because they're thrown up because they were gay. And then, of course, you can cross all those things together. Religious organizations that throw away their children because they're gay or they're different or they're trans or whatever the reasoning is. And
yeah,
that has to stop.
yeah. Like the people that are in those desperate situations or unprepared for, yeah, don't have the stable structures, don't need more abuse or to be like
No.
mistreated more. They were already mistreated to get to that point.
Yeah. And then there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those people turn to desperate measures to survive, and they turn to drugs to numb themselves or alcohol to numb themselves. And then the people in these religions say, see, that's what happens
Right.
when you leave.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm going to build an automatic failure because I'm going to cut off every possible human touch from this person. And when they fail, I'm going to blame them for that too.
Yeah. There's this, looked like a rabbinical guy, rabbi of some kind, but he had on Instagram, I was seeing him, and he's like a psychologist, maybe, but he's saying like drugs are not the problem. The drugs are actually the solution to the problem,
Yeah.
which is not the way most people see drugs.
Yeah.
But in the case that you mentioned, numbing yourself from the actual pain or suffering, it's like, okay, if everything sucks, but I can feel okay by using this substance, that's a better day than just suffering all day.
Self-medication. I mean, that's all it is, self-medication. When you go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes something for your mood stabilizer, that's a drug, right?
Actually, have you ever, Alexander and Anne Shulgin? They wrote Tikal, the like 1950s, 60s pioneers in the substance isolation world. They created like 200 different substances, like MDMA isolated for the first time. And
You're ringing a bell. I don't have a direct reading of that, but you're ringing a bell for
so
sure.
I'm just wrapping that up. And in the end of the book, it's basically a huge call to action. Like, where do you draw the line in your society about substance usage? Because like, it's like less than 5% of drug related deaths are from illicit drugs, illicit chemicals. And 95, or it was maybe 99. It was like some crazy, like most of the deaths from use of chemicals is from pharmaceutical chemicals being prescribed, misprescribed, misused, have strange interactions between each other. And so like having a prohibition where we like get to say like, oh, any human who uses this substance is actually the bad guy is just a way to like create chaos and an entire healthcare crisis and industry, and also be able to, for the government to like move money wherever they want to and to start wars wherever they want to. It's just like an excuse because ultimately
a group of people based upon their racial component by making a very specific drug illegal. I mean,
Yeah,
if you want to
right.
read about how marijuana has been treated in our country and how the legality and illegality of it has been used as a political crowbar to
Yeah,
affect voter capability. It's a fascinating story here in our country. It's
we should,
amusing to me now that it's fully legal, and I think of the litter of bodies in the U.S. jails over the last 50 years and the destruction of the lives. No, it's legal.
yeah.
You go to the store, buy it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the people that are still in prison for moving or using that chemical are
Yeah,
still in jail, and taxers are still paying for them to stay in the box,
yeah,
suffering. Just broken families because they moved a product that is fully legal to do so now.
yeah. It reminds me of the new light of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Mm,
The new
yeah.
light. I mean, if there was a time when if you had a beard, oh, a nice goat, you got rolling there. If you full beard, okay, yeah. If you had a beard, we would throw you out of the religion potentially and never talk to you again. You couldn't speak to your family because you had facial hair. So there
Right.
were lives that were disrupted in the more conservative, tighter control group congregations around that, and blood transfusions. There was a time when you could have a partial blood transfusion, and then times when you could not have that at all. So families were destroyed, people died, but now those rules, hey, you can have a beard now. Come on.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. When you start to lose control of the society, you alter the rules, whether that society is a small group of religious adherents or it's a planet full of people. The rules are in place to control behaviors, assuage behaviors, or punish. And
Yeah.
it's very convenient to be able to claim that you have new information from God that allows
Mm,
you to alter this rule with no consequence.
yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I think that it's been really revealing with me doing this project where I interview former artist members who've made a piece of art about their work. Um, is that these and I've since met people from all different kinds of groups: Children of God, the
Mm.
Exclusive Brethren, Mormons, ex-Orthodox Jews, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many, right? It's like an endless stream of people from like weird groups that exist. Usually, it's like former European communities who don't have any connection to their wisdom keepers or cultures or indigenous roots. But ultimately, they've gotten wrapped up in some kind of religiously structured control group and then gotten out. But like the ways that they control are almost identical. It's
Yeah.
just a different label for the same social pressure. In this case, you're talking about the government. And then it's like, okay, so yeah, religious groups are doing this, but it's humans that are doing this. And the governments are just every state government, every national government is another human experiment where they use the same kind of pressures to control people that cults do. And then it's like, okay, wait, I thought I was wrapped up in some special thing. No, the entire thing is a mess. How do we educate people to not do this stuff? Like, I feel like a 10-year journey of exploring the topic, I've become like, I'm like, I think I just achieved my master's degree, and my experience points are like, everyone has this problem. It's not just me.
No, no, it's
And what
not.
I can see it, and they can't see it. They're like,
Wow.
oh yeah, my team's better than your team. We're
Yeah.
the right ones. You're the wrong ones. Oh, we have to do something to get rid of all these nasty Democrats or nasty Republicans, or it's the liberals, like whatever
Yeah.
position you are.
Yeah. Bob Dylan said, we all got to serve somebody. And, Bob was talking about a bigger thing. He was talking about the leaders and the followers. And we are humans, we're animals. We are a few steps up, maybe from some of our animal brothers and sisters, but not too many steps that we don't retain some of the same traits. And one of the biggest traits of animals is that you don't generally see giraffe and lions and elk hanging out together. They stay with their own kind, their own herd, their own species. There's a million ways to cut a species up. But we humans, within a few ranges of differences, are all the same species. We might be taller or shorter or darker or lighter or different kind of hair, but we're all identified as humans. So what do we use to separate our species? Belief concepts. Something simple as sports team adherence, because you've got a sports team
Yeah.
that's geographically local to you and you must follow that team. If not, you're ostracized, all the way up to the country borders, to the religious borders, to the language borders, to the economic and socioeconomic borders. We find a million ways to say my group, your group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only getting worse. The microcosmic groups are getting tighter and smaller. The bubbles are getting smaller and tighter. And the communication lines that we used to have between bubbles are broken, as we all know. And I'm not saying anything that any of us don't know, living every day in our world. But I think the trick to becoming better as a species is to at least agree on one common concept, and that is we respect each other as a human. That's simple.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get there, we got a chance, I think.
Humanists unite. Yeah.
We need T-shirts. We need slogans. We need churches. I don't know.
Join our humanists against the rest of the humans. Get tribal about humanism.
Yeah. Tribal, huh? Humanistic tribalism. That's right. We'll protect our group. There we are again, right?
Right.
That innate need to label, I think, is one of the detriments to the society. We're not comfortable unless we can label somebody. They're straight and they're Catholic and they're Republican and they're college educated and they live in the suburb. Like all of those labels, we got to wrap them up. And then if you diverge in any part of the label for any given reason, well, they're not really a good Republican or a good Democrat or a good Christian, or maybe a bad Christian or whatever it is that allows you to take your razor blade of division and carve them into a different group other than you so you can spare them or ignore them or demean them.
Yeah, humans.
But we're pretty incredible too. I mean, yeah, we got all that, but we do some pretty incredible things too. I have hope for us humans. I think we'll get there. I do.
Yeah, I have to live with some hope because it keeps the machine running.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of good people out there, and that's one of the things I learned from traveling a lot. Is like, okay, I'm interacting. I'm the outsider here, and people are like super generous. People were super curious everywhere I went, very inviting, and a lot of hospitality. Like everywhere in the world I've gone, and I've been so impressed by that like innate nature on the first impression to offer something positive, and it's like really inspiring.
Yeah.
One of the best teachers of my life is just hitting the road.
That's awesome. And the old joke is, a human is a great thing. Humanity, not so much, right? So
it's Carlin's whole philosophy. It's like I love people one at a time, but if you put them in groups, they get they go sour or something.
Let me find my symbiotes. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that people, by and large, are very generous, very magnanimous, very loving and concerning and caring about their fellow people. For the most part, I'd say almost as a rule. There are exceptions, of course, to that rule. And there are exceptions within the rule, but I think mostly everyone wants love in their life. They want a strong family in their life. They want to have a place to live. They want regular food and freedom of mind, freedom of action, freedom of activity. We all share that. We all do.
I like the idea of a victimless a government. If they're going to set up rules, and there has to be some kind of structure and order to some degree. I lean like left and anarchist personally, with like less leadership, but ultimately like you have to have some kind of, you have to draw lines and boundaries. But as long as there's no victims, like you can do whatever the hell you want. Just don't hurt anybody else. Probably like don't damage the environment because we all need that. Yeah. But
and I think the old physician adage, first do no harm, should be the way we approach every day, right? First, don't hurt anybody. That's kind of easy, right? And think about your actions. A considered life is a more gentle life, I think. I don't see how anybody could possibly kill another human being for the land they sit on if they thought that person was like them.
Right.
Couldn't do it if you really did it, right? You'd be a psychopath.
You have to have someone, like in your book, you have to have some kind of psychopath who wants to experiment with pain just for the sake of it.
Yeah, and there are those evil. They exist. I encountered one, two, maybe three.
Well, I wanted to keep it a tight hour.
Yeah.
But we didn't get into deep loss. We touched on drugs. We didn't touch on alcohol. And we didn't touch quite on criminal underworld. But we did touch on some of the lightness that I think you bring. And then I want to get into like some of the recovery and methodology that has helped you.
Sure.
So kind of maybe want to take one or two of those topics, then get into some of the solutions?
Yeah, I'd love to. Love to. Thank you. So, very quickly, again, my book starts when I'm about 8 in the blue-collar town of Levittown, PA, which was a strong, working-class, wonderful town of people. Then, of course, my entire suburban life fell apart with the loss of my father, with the attempts of my life, with my mother joining the cult, with being thrown out of the cult, living homeless. But what got me out of the homelessness was, unfortunately, working in nightclubs. Or fortunately, or unfortunately, probably both, right? Fortunately, because it was a job that I didn't have to have a qualification for. I love music, kind of like drinking. And it started to make a really good living at it. Did very, very well. So that took me out of homelessness very quickly. In fact, one of the first major nightclubs I worked at was attached to a complex that had a hotel. And I lived in the hotel gratis as I worked in the nightclub and ate in the restaurant. So it was amazing. Here was this homeless kid with no training, no anything. And boom, I was saved. Well, what a lot of folks don't tell you is within the nightclub industry, there's a lot of crime. There's a lot of drugs. And when you cross the crime, the drugs together, you get the organized crime. So without going into too much in the book, I had some run-ins and had some experiences there, both the criminal element and drugs and alcohol. So ultimately, I got away from it all and I made another escape. So I escaped the serial killer in training. I escaped the cultish religion. I escaped the fundamentalist upbringing and escaped homelessness. And then lastly, escaped drugs, alcohol, and the criminal element, shall we say. How did I do it? He said, now we talk about recovery. Nothing's ever a straight line, of course. So it took me some time. I'm an older gentleman. I'm over 60. Most of this occurred up until the time I was around 25. I used a lot of techniques. But the main technique I used to slay my demons and find my truth was reading and books. I'd love to tell you that I had some method that nobody's thought of to take myself out of poverty and out of addiction and out of potential crime, but it was books. It was stories. Anything you need to know in the universe can be found in someone's story somewhere. So I read my way out of it. I said, okay, who has something to say on healing the soul? Who has something to say on being free from dependency and self-medication? Who has something to say about creating a path for a career? And I read and I read and I researched and I read, and the philosophers guided me as well. I read some, deep philosophy books on how to center yourself in the midst of chaos. Did a lot of meditation and didn't even know what it was called. I just know that that's what I did. Now I do. I look back to the Wayback Machine and go, oh, I was doing a rudimentary form of meditation. I was doing.
How old were you when you started that?
Well, when I started doing that, it was probably not too long after my father passed. I was about 13 or 14. And then
I had an English teacher teach us to do meditative practice. Really? He's like, we're going to lay down on the floor next to our desks in classroom. And I want you to do this breathing practice. And now that I look back, and I was like, oh, that was just straight up like body. There's a type of meditation where you like observe different parts of your body and you slow down your heart rate through breathing. And it was like, and I was like, that's how I went to sleep every night. I've been meditating in that form since I was a teenager, almost the same age as you.
Yeah, accidental meditationist. I like it.
Yeah. She didn't call it that. She didn't use that word because in the Christian, world, in the rural, America, that's it. Yeah, exactly.
The demons get in when you're not looking, those sneaky bastards. But yeah, so I mean, I practiced something. I believe I was influenced by a few of the books that I read in philosophy, and one of the things I took away, which had a great impact on me, is I'm a child of the space race. So I saw landing on the moon and the early missions, and of course, and it.
Are you trying to say that the landing on the moon is real?
I am not trying to say that. But I was very much influenced by that. And one of my fondest memories is staying awake till 3 o'clock in the morning, watching the TV in black and white transmission from the surface, right?
Wow.
And with my dad, next to us, and my mom too. And as a result, I've always looked up. I've always looked up into the stars. I had broken telescope when I was a little kid. And when the telescope didn't work, I'd lay on my back and just watch the sky. And one thing that I always took away from looking at the sky is how insignificant and unimportant I am. If you imagine that the universe is so big, we can't even intellectually grasp the concept without physics and math. It's so infinitely huge. I shouldn't say infinitely. That's the jury's out on the infinite part. But it's so big. I'm nothing. I'm less than nothing. I'm a speck on a speck on a speck that disappears in 80 years, never to be heard or seen again, as far as we know. It could be many things that happen after that. I haven't lived through it to tell you about them. But that insignificance, that universalism, I've used it to realize that this too will pass. No matter what you're going through, no matter what's got you by the shorts, this will pass.
Yeah.
So the real fundamental way I got through it all is that if I was knocked down 6 times, I got up 7. That's it.
Yeah.
No big secret. There's no Hallmark card reading. There's no 5-book series. There's no educational seminar. Literally, for me, getting through and healing and recovering was just, oh, that happened. I'm going to get up and try again. I'm going to figure out why I fell down, why I went backwards, and try to fix it. If you start there, and that requires a lot of hope and faith, but if you start there, there's nothing you can't do. Nothing at all.
Actually, really like in the book where you're up against your first big boss battle, and it's like the mental internal moment, like, oh, this is the kind of moment where I have to get up again, and like kind of toying with this idea, and then the results are this, everything's better if you just, it can get better if you get up.
Yeah, I think your life is over when you don't get up again, even if you stay alive. What is it? I don't even know who said that, but the coward dies a million deaths. And it's true. And I don't want to infer that someone who can't get up is always a coward, because sometimes you're just beat to the point where you can't. But if you recognize that first you're nothing, and then realize that, but in the same light, I'm also everything. And I think there is the root of all strength to become better, stronger, and survive.
Something just came up for me. I think people often ask, what do you believe now? Because humanism is interesting as a place to be in the way you see the world or life, because it doesn't have the negative connotations depending on what group you're a part of and how you label yourself. Even atheism is like a strange label, right? An identity to form around not the negative of something. But there's a lot of, especially 20 years ago, there's like the debates with religious leaders and the new atheists and whatnot, and that kind of all went away. But do you have some kind of a belief, or do you have some kind of a worldview now, after going through all these difficult situations, dealing with all different kinds of humans, from the top to the bottom of human experience?
I do. I've avoided labels, as you can tell from the artist discussion, of even refuting the word homeless when I was, because I think labels are limiting. I think when you call yourself a thing, you've closed off the possibility to become another thing. Because we humans very strongly hold on to our labels, even in the face of new evidence that proves we're not that thing. We still hold, but I'm a fill in the blank, right? It's the old no true Scotsman. Funny story if you've ever encountered that. But labels is how we identify friend and foe. And sure, so I think the tenets of humanism appeal to me most from any officially organized and or sanctioned and or defined series of beliefs. I would also add to that label secular humanism, because I don't subscribe to any organized religion or any particular theistic belief. My jury's still out. I have a very big question mark on the universe and everything. Very good book series about the universe and everything. I have a big questioning mind, and I will keep on asking the questions and filling in blanks where I can, full well knowing that my tiny little speck on the speck can only perceive such a small portion of our reality as to be almost laughable. But that's okay. I'll do my best. I'll keep asking my questions. So I found that humanism allows me to accept people where they are, first, do no harm, and to do everything I can to ensure that those people have as good a life as possible, while also ensuring the happiness of my own life. Um, my happiness and my survival ends where somebody else's begins. And that's really my religion. I will live my life as freely as I choose to, unless the doing of those actions and the living of my life negatively impacts somebody adjacent to me, near me, or somebody in the world. And I will do what I can to make positive impact in those areas. And that's always a work in progress, because every decision we make a million micro decisions a day that impact the world, impact the ecology of our world, the environment, our neighbors. It's not easy to do it consciously, but I'm doing my best. That's all I can do.
It sounds like, yeah. What else? What more is there that you can ask of somebody than to do the best
That's all I can do.
that they can
But
do?
the question of God and the universe and faith, my jury's out. It really is. It really is. Yeah. Hopefully there'll be some broader answers, because obviously there's more than we can conceive of in the universe. Who knows what it is? So.
Yeah.
But so far, I've
There's,
listened to a lot of people telling me stories to try to control me, and those stories have a lot of holes in them. So.
it is interesting to hear your story about like being 14, already a skeptic. Like you didn't even need to be taught how logical fallacies work, and you're in a situation that was really not the best start to life, with like the abuse in the home and the difficulties with different. Yeah, your parents didn't sound like they were giving you the best start.
No, we talk about generational pain. I mean, there was a lot of generational pain there, and they learned it from their parents.
Right.
And do I blame them for that? No. Do I forgive them for it? I have. But I won't forget it, because I don't repeat it, and I want to help other people identify it and escape it.
Right. And then you mentioned, like, that's interesting in its own. Like, kids can see through the frameworks of these religious groups or these like control systems that exist
Sometimes.
everywhere, even
Sometimes.
in the government. Yeah, sometimes. And I think that's really interesting. And also, you said something about just like the simplicity of looking at the moon and the stars at night, making you feel so tiny. Or for me, also, I did a lot of that as well growing up. We had low light pollution in the north of Wisconsin and great meteor showers and the northern lights and stuff. But so we did a lot of stargazing, but also when we went to the mountains, it was like, oh man, I feel so insignificant on the top of, on the side of this outrageous chunk of rock and dirt. There's something about the perspective you get when you have those kind of viewpoints, that also, like in my limited but profound moments for me, psychedelic experiences, one of the overarching things that keeps on coming from those visuals or those experiences, like I'm connected to everything and I'm so insignificant. I'm so tiny in this outrageously, unfathomably large system that like any kind of problem I have, like, oh, I don't, something that was said on social media upset me. And it's like, really?
Really?
You're going to let something that someone wrote that you don't even know bother you in the grand scheme of things?
Exactly. Universalism is a really useful tool. I mean, just recognizing your place in this almost infinite cosmos, all of a sudden the tension and the fear is beginning to drift away. And what couldn't we do as a species without fear? Wow. We could be so much if we didn't fear, but we do. And there's rational reasons for the fear, but we tend to give our fears more power and our hopes less power. And it's a subtle change, but feeling your insignificance also says to your psyche, your soul, your mind, your brain, whatever you want to label it, that not only am I insignificant, but all of this is insignificant. And your attempts to control me are insignificant. You have no power, because no one has power. We're all part of this infinite system, and none of us have power. We think we do, or we strive for it, but we don't. It's an illusion. Power is an illusion. Ego, as your psychedelic experiences led you to that realization, ego is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, we're all star stuff. We're all matter and molecules from the stars. That's it. That's where we come from. That's where we go. So what we do while we're here only matters to those we do it to and to ourselves. At least that's what I've learned so far. Maybe there's a higher power that's got a judgment book. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to be judged poorly for not knowing their existence or worshiping in a way, but so be it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Thank you.
And yeah, diving into those little aspects of the book that are so, stand out so powerfully in such a great storytelling. You're a great storyteller.
Thank you.
In the book, I really appreciate your writing style. It really reads like it brought me back to my childhood in a way that I never expected a memoir to do. So everyone go and check out, let's see, here is the book, The Truth About Demons. You can get it I put the link in the chat. It's in the description as well, camgilchrist.com. And there's a special promotion right now with the book is in pre-order. And I'm offering a special thing. So if you've watched this, I mentioned at the beginning, I mentioned it again. If you go to witnessunderground.com, I have a movie. This channel is related to that website. Subscribe with your email and write and let me know that you want the promo code for the free Blu-ray, and then you pay shipping. And I'll get that off to you until the book is out. So can you give us one last rundown on where to check out, where to buy, pre-order the book, and what the dates are?
I sure will. Thanks, Scott. First of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. I love talking to you. It's always great. I think we're kindred spirits. We're brothers from another mother, for sure. So let's do this again. The book is available in hardcover now on Amazon, but hardcovers are expensive. Times are tough. The pre-order for the Kindle version and for the paperback are up. It's going to be dropping super soon, January 15th. So if you put in a pre-order, it'll drop right to you. The ebook will be dropped to you on the 15th, and the paperback will come shortly after the 15th. It's also available for Nook readers and Barnes & Noble, Apple Books and Google Books, all the January 15th for the most part. So, and I also just want to leave you with this. The Truth About Demons is not a story of negativity or your standard book of problems. I try to mix both the joy and the pains that I experienced in the life, and to give somebody a fair look at some of these issues, and maybe, just maybe, some ways that we can fix some of them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cam. Look forward to hearing what everyone thinks of the book.
Yeah. Thank you.